Originally was given on Thursday, March 28, 2024, which was Maundy Thursday. We were unable to live stream it, and we are doing so today. Our scripture is Mark 15:16 through 39. The soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him, dividing his clothes. They cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. At noon, darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m. And at 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" When some of those standing near heard this, they said, "Listen, he is calling Elijah." Someone ran, filled a sponge with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to take him down," he said. With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. The curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion, who stood there in front of Jesus, saw how he died, he said, "Surely this man was the Son of God."
I come to you today from a distant time and space to tell you about the events of that day. A day that changed my life forever. Before that day, I took pride in being a centurion. Since I was a young boy, that was a dream of mine to fulfill. I was not born into an important Roman family, nor did I know anyone in the elite families who could write me a certificate of recommendation to become one. I rose to be a centurion because of my bravery and my courage in battle, because of my intelligence, and because of a lot of good luck. Being a Roman soldier, death was no stranger to me. But to die in battle as a Roman soldier was the highest of honors. And so I entered every battle as if it were my last. I was not afraid to die. And being a Roman centurion meant that I led 100 men, but I led into battle from the front, not from behind. And so I killed many men in hand-to-hand combat. And I killed many people through crucifixion. Crucifixion like this man's. But his was very different. That morning began with high anxiety as we approached the Jewish celebration of Passover. And it happened at this time every year. It is a time when they celebrated and they remembered how God had freed them so many years ago from their enslavement in Egypt. And that's what made it dangerous. Because each year, as they relived that story, thoughts would come into their head that maybe God would make that happen again for them, and they would throw the Romans off their backs. I witnessed his interrogation by Pontius Pilate. And I saw how he wouldn't respond to any of Pilate's questions, nor did he react to the crowd cheering at him or jeering at him, saying, "Crucify him, crucify him." There was no one to plead his case, and he offered none himself. Pilate grew tired of the whole scene and the crowd, and finally he ordered him to be flogged and to be crucified. I ache now as I remember allowing my men to mock and abuse him. They put a purple robe on him and paraded him around, hailing him as a king. Then one of the soldiers suggested that he's not really a king unless he has a crown. Another soldier fashioned a crown out of thorny branches, and he placed it on his head, but he pushed it down into his scalp so that blood ran down his face. A face that was already red and swollen from the soldiers punching him, abusing him. I could have said something. Looking back, I could have done something to ease this man's suffering, but I didn't. You see, that was the point of crucifixion. It was to stop an insurrection, to halt it right in its tracks, to make it as painful, to make it his suffering as severe, to make his public shame as so great that no one else would even think about doing what this man did. And so he never said a word to any of the abuse that we gave him. He never responded, never reacted. And I can remember that as we prepared him for crucifixion, it was almost as if he was saying to us, "Go ahead, wear yourselves out with your abuse. I'll take everything you have to give." And he never once responded to our anger or to our violence with anything he said or anything he did. He didn't fuel us. Not getting the response that we had expected or wanted, we prepared him for crucifixion. And it was evident that this man would not be able to carry his cross through the crowds, displaying his humiliation. As we put the cross on his shoulders, he took a few steps, but then he just crumbled under the weight of the wood. So I quickly selected a man in the crowd who seemed big enough and strong enough to carry this instrument of execution. We made our way through the crowd, very aware and watching for any person or group that might want to come and help him. And our climb up the hill of crucifixion was slow and arduous, but we finally made it. There were 2 other criminals crucified with him. We quickly nailed them to their crosses. Then we turned to this man who seemed barely alive at that point. And then, as I drove the nails through his hands and through his feet, he winced and cried out. And that was the only time I sensed any fear in this man at all. We lifted his cross and put it in place, and then we stepped back to wait for the end to come. Crucifixion could take several days, and we were prepared for anything. We were there to control the crowd, but also to make sure no one came to help him or the other criminals. It was at that moment that things really began to change for me. This man didn't respond to crucifixion and the violence we did against him as any of the other 2 did, or anyone else for that matter. The 2 other criminals railed at him, or us, I should say, cursed us, expressed anger towards us, but not this man. He only said a very few words, and he never responded to the anger or the vehemence of the crowd that caused his suffering. At one time, one of the criminals railed against him, saying, "If you are the Messiah, then save yourself and save us with you." And it seemed that he was just echoing what the crowd had called when they said, "If you are the Messiah, then come down from the cross. Prove it to us. Show us a sign." The other criminal chastised the man, saying that they were getting the just punishment for the crimes they had committed, but this man had done nothing wrong. Then he turned to the man, saying, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." I thought, how unbelievable. This man, a king, he's being crucified by Rome. We even put a sign, "Here is your king of the Jews," mocking them as a small nation. And paradise? As far as I was concerned, this man was going into the darkness of death, not some idyllic place. As I said, he said very little in response to the crowd jeering at him, to the punishment he had received. But there was one moment when he called out to his father, saying, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing." I thought, how odd. We don't know what we are doing? I disagreed with him. We knew exactly what we were doing. We were getting rid of him. The crowd knew what they were doing. We were dispensing of him and getting rid of the trouble that he was making. There was one moment, though, that touched me very deeply. A woman in the crowd moved forward. Later, I discovered that it was his mother. She moved towards the cross and caressing and kissing his feet, not regarding the blood and the dirt that was upon them. And I had to turn away from this sight, this moment of love and tenderness, because it reminded me of my mother, who died when I was just a young boy, leaving me to live and thrive in the streets. But in watching her and her tenderness, I remember how my mother used to console me when I was upset or hurt in any way. She would hold me. She would wipe away my tears with her hands, her loving hands. She would assure me that everything was going to be all right. My attention came back to this man as he addressed the woman and a young man standing next to her to console her. And he said, "Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother." As the day went on, my attention shifted between this man and the crowd. I was watching for any possible insurrection, but none came. And oddly enough, as I looked at his face, I kept wondering, why doesn't he say something? Why doesn't he express something to this angry mob who caused his suffering and death? But the only thing I could see in his face was a look of love and compassion. And I wondered why. How could he do this? But as I looked at his face, I began to see other images that really troubled me. I began to see, as I looked into his face, the faces of the other people I had killed in battle. And as I looked into his face even more, I began to see the faces of the people that I had crucified. I tried to turn away. I didn't want to think about it. But there was something that just compelled me, as if he was saying to me, "Look into my face." And as I stared, I saw face after face, and I could see the harm that I had caused other people. I could see the suffering I had caused in their lives and the pain I had inflicted. And then to my shock, as I stared at his face, I saw my face. It was as if he was saying to me, "Look what you've done. You haven't just hurt these other people. You haven't just caused their suffering. You've caused your own pain at the same time." Tears began to run down my face. I turned away, not wanting my soldiers to see me sobbing. Nonetheless, a few came over, and I quickly dispensed them back to their post. And then when I turned around, there was his face again. I was distracted from it as the clouds began to gather. The wind began to blow furiously at times. People started leaving to escape the storm. But then my attention was drawn to his face one more time. And what I saw overwhelmed me. His eyes met my eyes, as if he was looking into me. And what I saw was not anger or guilt or retribution. What I saw was love and compassion. And then those words that he spoke a few hours ago, "Forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing," came back to me. He was forgiving me the harm that I was causing him. And then he lifted himself up on the cross and he looked up into the sky and he called out to his Father one more time, "It is finished. Into your hands I give my spirit." And then he just slumped on the cross. His breath went out of him. And the ground began to shake. People began to run away scared, frightened. Many of my soldiers left as well. In all of this commotion, it was obvious that what we had done was terribly wrong. There were times when I felt so righteous about the crucifixions that we had performed. These people deserved it. But there was something about this man, the way that he responded to our abuse, that said, this is totally different. I was overwhelmed by the whole scene. And then I heard myself say, almost mindlessly, surely this man was the Son of God. And I was horrified. What had we done? What had we done to something so innocent, so beautiful, so good? How could we have done such harm? Well, we received a message from Pilate that we were to break the legs of the criminals so that they would die more quickly on the cross. But when my soldier went to this man, he could see that he was already dead, so he didn't break his legs. His friends came to take him down from the cross. And there his mother again appeared. And she insisted on holding the lifeless body of her son one last time. I was overwhelmed by that scene as she sat there holding her son, overwhelmed with grief that her tears began to run down her face onto his face. And then she began to wipe away with her hand the blood and the dirt. And it reminded me of how my mother would care for me the very, very same way. Such tenderness, such love, such gentleness. My knees just gave way. I fell to the ground and I wept bitterly. After a while, I came to myself, and as I looked up, there was no one else there. I was all alone. In the distance, a soldier came from Pilate with a message that I was to give a report about the events of that day, which I did. But as I went to report, I knew that that would be the very last time I would ever do anything as a Roman soldier. I was once so proud to serve Rome, and now I was disgusted. After reporting to Pontius Pilate, I went back to the barracks. I took off my armor and my uniform, and I dressed just as you see me here today. And I roam from town to town now. And I don't have a home to go to. And there are some nights, quite frankly, that I can't sleep, or that I'm awakened in the middle of the night with the image of his face on that cross, with the pain that we had inflicted, feeling that guilt inside. But then, as if magically, the other face appears. The one that looked at me with love and compassion and forgiveness. We took beauty and love and divinity out of this world that day. And now all I can do is go from place to place and try to share that goodness, try to bring that hope, try to share that face of love with others. Thank you for listening to my story.